The officer's approach starts with a key assumption that Reggie still has his drone in the air, when in reality he's just reviewing earlier footage. News Now Yorkshire highlights why that distinction is important. The rules set by the Civil Aviation Authority apply to the act of flying, not to someone standing on the ground holding a controller or checking recordings. Acting without confirming that basic fact shows the decision is being driven by assumption, not observation. Instead of verifying the situation, the interaction moves quickly toward warnings and potential consequences. They suggest contacting the authority to impose restrictions, but any such action would only apply going forward. It can't be used to retroactively label a past flight as unlawful. That makes the warning feel less like enforcement and more like an attempt to apply pressure in the moment. Bringing up Article 256 of the Air Navigation Order 2016 adds to the confusion. That provision requires actual endangerment during operation, not a possibility, not a guess, but a demonstrable risk caused while the drone is being flown. Without evidence of that, referencing it doesn't establish a solid legal basis. Instead, it reinforces the pattern of relying on broad claims rather than clearly defined, applicable rules. The lack of clarity becomes obvious right at the key moment. When Reggie asks a direct question, whether he's under arrest, they avoid giving a straight answer and instead push again for his personal details. News Now Yorkshire highlights how that alone reveals the priority isn't a clearly defined defense, but identifying him first. When he declines, the situation escalates almost instantly. Arrest is introduced, not on the basis of a clear offense, but as a way to obtain those details. That's a major concern, because arrest powers aren't designed to be used as leverage when someone simply chooses not to provide information. The grounds must exist independently, not be created by refusal. What follows only adds to the confusion. Handcuffs are applied without a clear explanation, and at the same time another officer grabs his controller. The sequence feels rushed, with control taking over before procedure is properly communicated. Reggie is left asking basic questions, whether he's being detained or arrested, things that should have been made clear from the very beginning. Only after those questions are repeated do they confirm his status. Even then, when he explains that the drone is already packed away and not in use, the justification doesn't shift. The focus remains on obtaining his details, reinforcing the impression that the detention is being driven by that objective rather than a clearly established legal basis. When they suggest they can simply de-arrest him once he provides his details, it immediately reveals the flaw in their reasoning. News Now Yorkshire shows how that approach clashes with Section 24 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984, which requires an arrest to be necessary at the time it's made. It's not a tool to secure someone's identity and then reverse the decision afterward. The necessity has to exist first, not be justified later. Reggie calls this out directly, pointing to the reversal of proper procedure. Instead of establishing grounds and then acting, they appear to act first and look for justification afterward. That becomes even more apparent when his controller is returned and the footage is still running, clearly showing he wasn't even flying the drone when they approached. He then goes a step further by voluntarily opening his bag to show the drone inside. That's something he isn't required to do. There's no obligation to assist or provide evidence in that way. Yet he does it anyway, attempting to clear up the situation through transparency. The fact that he has to go to those lengths to counter assumptions speaks volumes. It shifts the burden away from the officers establishing grounds and onto him disproving them, which is not how the process is supposed to work. The key issue is that the lawful basis simply isn't there, and Reggie had already checked the area against guidance from a civil aviation authority, confirming the flight was permitted. News Now Yorkshire highlights how this shows the officer is relying on assumption rather than applying the actual rules that govern drone use. When the drone is then found sitting inside the bag, it removes any sense of urgency that had been used to justify the situation. If the device isn't even in operation, the reasoning behind maintaining the arrest becomes even harder to support. What was presented as an immediate concern no longer aligns with the reality in front of them. Reggie's warning about taking legal action isn't just an emotional reaction. It reflects a real legal avenue. If an arrest is made without proper grounds, it can potentially fall into areas like unlawful arrest or false imprisonment, both of which can be challenged through civil proceedings. Those are serious implications, and they underline why the requirement for clear, lawful justification at the time of arrest is so important. With a sergeant present and allowing everything to continue, it raises real concerns about oversight. Supervision is meant to step in and correct questionable decisions, not allow them to carry on unchecked. News Now Yorkshire shows how even after the drone is physically found inside Reggie's bag, the claim that an offense has occurred doesn't immediately fall away. At that point, the supposed risk they were relying on no longer exists. There's no active flight, no ongoing activity that could present danger. Yet the justification continues, with the officer eventually stating the arrest was based on suspicion. That's where the issue becomes even clearer. Article 256 of the Air Navigation Order 2016 isn't triggered by suspicion alone. It requires actual endangerment, real, demonstrable risk to people or property during operation. Falling back on suspicion for a threshold that demands clear evidence shows how far the reasoning has been stretched. The eventual de-arrest says more than any explanation. Once the situation is properly examined and the facts are clear, the grounds no longer hold. That outcome reinforces the point. Without solid evidence from the outset, the use of such powers becomes difficult to justify. After everything that's unfolded, Reggie expressing frustration is suddenly used as a basis to mention breach of the peace. News Now Yorkshire shows how that leap doesn't align with what the power is actually meant for. It requires an imminent risk of harm or disorder, not someone venting after being put through an arrest. With no sign of escalation, no crowd forming, and no complaints from the public, the foundation for that claim is weak. Reggie then shifts the focus back to facts. He offers to show his operator ID and explains that his drone is under 250 grams. That detail matters because drones in that category fall under lighter regulations when operated responsibly. It's a practical point that directly addresses the rules rather than relying on assumption that he also clarifies how he was flying, around 120 meters up and maintaining distance from the incident. That directly challenges any suggestion that he was interfering with emergency services. There's no indication of obstruction, no disruption being demonstrated, and no evidence of risk being caused, why grounding his explanation in specifics, weight, altitude, and distance. He counters broad claims with measurable facts. The contrast is clear. One side relies on shifting justifications, while the other provides consistent details that don't support the allegations being made. The outcome shown in the screenshot says more than the interaction itself ever could. The case was settled for £1,150, with compensation paid after legal action was taken. News Now Yorkshire highlights how settlements like that don't happen without concern over how the situation was handled. This goes beyond a disagreement on the street. It reached a point where the force chose to resolve it financially rather than defend it further. That result strongly suggests the arrest and overall treatment couldn't be properly justified when reviewed. When footage, timeline, and decisions are examined away from the moment, the standard changes. It's no longer about confidence or authority. It's about whether the actions can stand up to scrutiny. The ending itself is just as telling. The officer leaves the scene, while Reggie walks away frustrated, with no real resolution offered. There's no acknowledgement of what went wrong, no attempt to explain the escalation, just a quiet exit. That kind of conclusion often reveals more than any argument, because it shows how quickly certainty fades once the facts no longer support the